All right, I'm going to go ahead and start and just sort of let folks in as they pop up, as I said, after lunch. I appreciate you guys doing this after lunch. You signed up for something called Critically Engaged Civic Learning after lunch. It might as well have been like a study of particle physics, at that point during the day. That I've got one right after this too. They're even worse shape, I think. So I'll try not to bore you too much. I'm going to go ahead and I don't know anything about particle physics. I apologize for those that were expecting an explanation on the God particle. I don't. This is something different. Let me go ahead and share my screen and we'll get right into it. And there you go. Okay. Can you all see that okay? Okay, critically engaged civic learning, modernizing the service learning model. My name is Nick Hernandez. I teach, I'm a political science faculty. What we've been working on the last semester or more, I guess the last semester really in earnest, is developing a service learning program, but one that's a little bit more updated, which is why it says modernizing. And the approach that we've taken is this critically engaged civic learning. So this presentation is going to have a couple of parts to it. The first is just an explanation of what we're trying to develop on campus. And the second is how we're applying civic or critically engaged civic learning, what we refer to as CECL, how we're going to apply this model to the program that we're developing on campus, if that makes sense. So just a brief sort of introduction into what is happening, starting probably in the spring, and then some long-term goals. And then again, like, what does this mean, critically engaged civic learning, and how do we apply that to the model we're trying to establish? So if we're talking about the program on campus, and again, when I taught some years ago at College of the Canyons and worked with Dr. Patty Robinson there on their service learning program, one of the discussions that we had was about how do we update this traditional service learning model, because it can be problematic. So the reason that we're trying to modernize this service learning model is because of those problems that it has faced historically in the past. So although this outline looks like a traditional service learning program in the way in which students are involved or faculty are involved, the work that faculty, the work that students, the work that community members and organizations are doing, that is what is different, if that makes sense. So if you look through the bullet points and say, yeah, this looks familiar, I experienced this when I was in school, or I worked in a place that had something like this, that, it looks like a traditional model, but the type of work that the shareholders will be doing, that's what's significantly different. So just to, again, to give you an idea of what we've been working on and an idea of where we're trying to go with this. As I said, the first bullet point, pairing interested students with community members, that is something that, traditional service learning programs offer. Again, the type of work is going to be different, but we're going to pair students with community partners, with community allies. In addition to that, we want to encourage students to develop engaged learning projects, either in the classroom or on their own. So let me give you an example of what this looks like. When I taught at COC down in Southern California, one of the activities I do generally in class is to have students come up with or identify issues that are either facing the campus or facing the community, and then just briefly come up with some possible solutions, and then they pick one of those solutions and create a sort of a project proposal. How are you going to implement this project? So it's just an activity and sort of brainstorming, getting warmed up for the class. But one of the groups identified the issue of students that are new to campus not being able to navigate the campus well, in part because, as we all know, the students have smartphones, and college websites typically don't work well on cell phones. So instead of like, expanding photos, expanding maps, trying to find out where they're going to go, the students said, well, why don't we just create an app for the campus, right? So after class, I called them up. I said, hey, let's get this done. Why can't we get this done? So the students got together and I acted mostly as a facilitator, just getting them space to work. They met once a week. They started to outline a project proposal. They invited students from all over the campus, art students, design students, tech students, to develop an app, essentially. Like, what is this? What should this app do? How can it help students? They took that project proposal, they pitched it to the president of the college. She loved it. She found funding for it. They went to the tech department and said, how can we implement this? So there's a student group that came up with this idea, and they saw the thing through. They saw the project through the end. That app still exists. This was 6 years ago now. Many of those students have gone on and graduated from university or in graduate, programs right now, but the thing that they created back then still exists. I still get updates about it in my email. So encouraging students that have identified problems but don't necessarily know where to go to develop solutions. So a program, a critical service learning program at FCC would not just be that sort of traditional pairing students with community organizations, but also encouraging students to develop their own learning projects in the classroom. And I am aware that some faculty members do this in their classes. Some disciplines, it's part of the curriculum. But I feel like if this was a campus-wide effort, it would be really meaningful. In addition to that, getting campus clubs involved in something like this. I know many campus clubs do volunteer work, but again, if we could have the clubs develop some of these projects and then help them to implement the project, whatever it may be, in the community or on campus, again, I think that would make a pretty significant impact. I'd also like to create resources for faculty members who are interested in incorporating this into their curriculum. I think that's faculty buy-in is really important, and it can be a challenge sometimes. So if we have a place where faculty can go and say, I'm really interested in doing this, how do I go about doing it? Because the more people I talk to, the more faculty members I talk to, the more people who are involved in this work on other campuses, what they tell me is that one of the major reasons why there isn't as much faculty buy-in is just because faculty don't often know how to incorporate it. They want to, they just don't know how to make it part of the classroom. So having the resources to do that, whether it be a page on the website or a separate website, whatever it may be, where there's a place that faculty members can access those resources. Eventually, creating a leadership and social change course and possibly a certificate program. I know the creation of a course and the creation of a certificate program aren't necessarily frowned upon on campus, but not necessarily encouraged either. I think they're and I'm a newbie to campus. I mean, this is my third year, but from folks I've talked to, they're trying to edit courses, they're trying to delete courses rather than add. But I think, again, if we're talking about impact, having a course like this, leadership and social change, where students are learning, given the tools and learning and getting that knowledge about how to, for example, create project proposals for organizations, about how to identify some of the root causes of the problems facing a community, and then taking those tools and that knowledge out into the community and working with community organizations, but not necessarily for, I think would be really, really impactful as well. You'll hear me use that term quite a bit because, again, if we're talking about a traditional service learning model, the focus for a lot of times is about the hours, right? Students put in hours, but what we're trying to do with a model like this, using critically engaged civic learning, is shifting away from that hours model to impact, right? How are we going to have the greatest impact within a community? We are, after all, a community college. And I hear oftentimes the community college is serving the community. That may be true in some respects, but with a program like this, it's not about students or faculty serving the community, but rather working with in collaboration. So again, this is the vision. These are the things that we've been working on. And I've talked to a number of campuses and directors of similar programs, not just in California, but across the country. This particular CECIL program, Critically Engaged Civic Learning, I'll refer to it as CECIL now. It comes from Salem State University in Massachusetts. You know, the folks that I've talked to have said this is an incremental approach. You've got to start small and expand outward. And so these bullet points represent first steps, and with the long-term vision there at the bottom with trying to do this. So again, the title is about modernizing the traditional service learning model. So I'm curious if any of you have had any experience with service learning, if as a student, a grad student, as faculty member. If so, what were those experiences? What do you typically think of when you think of service learning? Does anybody have any comments or experiences with service learning? Just go ahead and unmute yourself. I don't know. I can't see my cursor anymore, so you're just going to have to shout at me, I think. Go ahead. I was wondering.
Okay, now can you hear me?
Now I can hear you.
Yay!
The computer is failing me at the wrong time. Yes.
You were like, just speak. So I was speaking.
I know. I was like, why isn't anybody?
So you asked about if anyone had experience with service learning.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it would be called exactly, but I did work at a charter school for several years here in Fresno.
Okay.
And it was a high school, but it was internship based and it was also project based. So the students had to find things they were interested in, work on like real life projects, and also work with businesses and companies here in Fresno. And they often did internships on site in these companies or did things for them and you know, worked within their classes using their content area classes to help devise different types of, I don't know, projects and plans that could also be implemented with these businesses as in Fresno.
Yeah,
so
and I think I think that project-based approach is significant. And I'm sorry to cut you off.
No, it's okay. And it's okay. But anyway, but they were incorporating those with these real companies and organizations here in Fresno. So
yeah, that's awesome. And again, I think and we'll get to this and you know, at some point, but the giving the students agency is, I think, the really important aspect of this, because it takes away that sort of institutional hierarchy that can I don't know, discourage some students. But if they are given that agency to develop their own projects, and again, as I'll talk to in a minute, oftentimes, you know, community service, community engagement, service learning, volunteerism, whatever it may, project-based learning, oftentimes that stuff gets lumped all together. And I think differentiating between the two is important, because you can use the principles of critically engaged civic learning, which we'll talk about, in your project-based program can be done. It's not, there aren't two separate things. So I'm sorry, anybody else? And if somebody, I can't get into my chat so I see the chat number, but I can't, for whatever reason, it won't.
Nick, it's Susie. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Susie.
I'll help you with the chat.
Thank you.
So it's just your colleagues. Kathleen Schock said she did her dissertation on the impact of service learning on graduation rates and attainment for minoritized students. Max Parrish wants Kathleen to share her findings.
Yes, I was just going to say, either I'll send out an email. Part of this presentation is a recruitment. You didn't know that, but I am making note of this so that I can reach out to folks. That would be incredibly interesting. because there's tons of research out there about the impact that this type of work has on students and their success rate. So yeah, I'd love to hear about it, Kathleen.
And Allison Brady took an environmental and social policy class, which was followed up by a trip to Bolivia where they built a school and a greenhouse.
Oh, wow.
Also in college, political science, but they did a voter registration online.
Yeah, and again, all of that falls into the service learning category. Well, let's just get into it, because again, it's important to differentiate between these types of experiences or the type of work. So one of the ways in which we can define critically engaged civic learning is talking about what it isn't. Again, it's not a traditional service learning model. Again, traditional service learning has to do with students working with or for organizations. There's some hours involved. It comes from the experiential sort of learning bubble, and at the end of the work, there's a reflection that happens. Typically, that when you think of service learning, that's the traditional model. And again, there are different branches of that. There are different ways to do it, but it's not that. What we're trying to develop is not necessarily that. Although there are, of course, students that will be going out and working with organizations. Again, the type of work that they'll be doing is altogether different than the traditional service learning model. It's not volunteerism, it's not an internship, it's not community service, and it's not field education. So and again, oftentimes this stuff gets lumped together. So how do we know the difference between the two? We can look at it this way with, the scale. In the middle, we have the beneficiary and the focus. So how do we know what kind of program it is? It really depends on who's benefiting from it and the focus of the work. So if you look at the bottom with volunteerism, the focus is on the service being done. This is where, you go and pick up trash, or you hand out canned foods at a shelter, or whatever it may be. The focus is the service itself. You feel good about the service. The beneficiary of your work, of that service, is the recipient of it. So if you're handing out canned foods, it's literally the person who is receiving that thing. Community service is different in that it is a service to the community. So there is a learning aspect to it, which is why it's a bit to my right, because there is learning involved that's happening. And that type of learning typically involves learning about the community in which you are working. Service learning can sit right in the middle, because the beneficiary could be the provider. The focus is on learning. The provider being the person doing the work, that is the focus. It's on me and the learning that I'm doing through this particular kind of work. Field education is pretty straightforward. Education in the field, it's sort of similar to an internship in the beneficiary and the focus. But again, with field education and internships, the focus is on the learning aspect of it and the provider. It's on me. I did both service learning and internships in college and graduate school, and it was about teaching me how to do a certain thing, right? So I developed an academic internship where I shadowed a community college instructor for a few years, right, while I was in grad school. And it was about teach me how to write a syllabus, teach me how to, teach me time classroom management. That type of thing was about me and the things that I learned. So critically engaged civic learning is not these things. And again, each of these is sort of independent, and the beneficiary and the focus is what makes them different, but we often sort of group them all together. Okay, so why are traditional service learning programs problematic? So we're trying to modernize the model. Many colleges in California, across the country, have some sort of service learning program. Many colleges do them well. De Anza Community College in the Bay Area has a really great program. But generally, part of the reason why these traditional programs are problematic is because of this inequitable power dynamic that inherently privileges one group over another, right? So it is a person providing a service to someone or, you know, some community or whatever it may be. You are walking in there and saying, I'm here to help you because you need help, right? Rather than there being a collaboration to resolve the issues. So this is what differentiates between this traditional model and this critically engaged civic learning model is sort of getting rid of that inequitable power dynamic. And again, statistically, we know that the people that are providing the service are predominantly white, and they're providing this service to a community that's predominantly of color. That just reinforces the structural and institutional inequity, right? I mean, it's not necessarily responsible community engagement, which we'll talk about in a minute, because what are we solving the problem that the organization is trying to address by sending students in there to get 12 hours of work for an organization and then a passive student reflection at the end? Are we really creating any social change with this particular model? So, the institutional inequity can also mean the sort of hierarchy that exists between faculty and student, right? We want to, and we'll talk about this more in a minute, sort of level that that relationship to create more of a collaborative effort rather than a student, you know, going to the faculty member and saying, what do I need to do in order to get into this service learning program? To say, you know, find an organization, go work for 12 hours, journal articles, end of the semester essay about what you learned, rather than the faculty and student coming together and the faculty asking these questions like, why is it that you want to learn about this community? You're like, what is driving you to do this? And then a collaboration between student and faculty. So that traditional service learning model can be problematic because of these inequities that exist, not just between our institution, the college, and the community, but in the college itself. Again, oftentimes when institutions or colleges send students out into the community, there is that level, that hierarchy. You know, it's like these are very well educated, they got PhD after their name or MA after their name. They must know more than the people in the communities themselves, which is a complete fallacy. And so we're trying to change that dynamic by creating a program that does away with that sort of old way of doing it. Again, it can be more damaging than beneficial. This is none of what I'm telling you today is anything that's new. This has been going on for decades, but the way in which it's being researched and described now is what's sort of new about it. My dad worked for the United Way of Tulare County as an executive director for 35 years. And he was always sort of preaching this idea that you've got to find the allies in the community who are already doing the work. We're not going in there on a white horse and saving the world. We're trying to get rid of that with this particular program. Okay, so the critically engaged civic learning framework shifts, and this is going to sound nuts coming from a faculty member at a college with students, but we're shifting the service learning from a student-centered pedagogy to this equity-based framework. The type of work should not just be student-centered. Not that student learning is not important, obviously it is, but it shouldn't be the focus. If you remember from that differentiating between the different types of service learning programs, service learning was right in the middle, right? It was very much student-centered. It was about learning and then the work that they were doing as a reflection. And this is saying, no, we don't want to just make it about the students, right? And the way in which we do that is through leveraging this cultural wealth of both the student and the communities, and I would say the faculty members as well. We know as faculty members in our classrooms, what the students bring to those classrooms is that cultural wealth. They bring these experiences that I certainly have never experienced. They often live in the communities, right? And so they understand the communities. And what's important is that they recognize that they do have this wealth, that they're actually bringing something to the table that is 100% beneficial. And again, I think that's part of the problem with the traditional service learning models, is that we're not acknowledging the fact that there have been people in these communities for decades that have been doing the same work that that academic, just started doing, right? For decades, they've been trying to solve this problem. So going in there as a student or as a faculty member and saying, here's the solution, I'm going to save you from these problems, is very much a deficit-based perspective of that community. We're trying to rid ourselves of that. The students bring a cultural wealth, the community members bring a cultural wealth. We have to acknowledge and recognize that that exists. That's the framework for the program that we're trying to create. And by doing this, then we decolonize those irresponsible community engaged practices, right? At that point, we have a multi-directional flow of knowledge. It's not this, single direction from the top, from the academics, from the students, saving the day and saving the community. And it's like, well, no, we have to recognize that there are people there that have been doing the work for a very long time that know a load more than you do. This happened in I live in Exeter, which is a bit south from you guys, but I remember an organization coming from the Bay Area, and they were given a ton of money to try and find a solution to all the agricultural pollution in our area, because it's very rural. We're surrounded by oranges and nut trees, and it gets very dusty, lots of particulate matter. But they came in and said, we're going to solve this problem. They talked to no farmers. And sort of ironically, the people who had the best solutions for this was the next generation, the young farmers who took over the farming from their parents, who were very progressive about farming, very forward thinking, who were using solar, who were using methane, who were using, safer pesticides, whatever it may be. But this organization swooped in with all of these accolades and with all of these letters after their names, were given a ton of money to do the work, but never once approached farmers about what they were already doing. That's missing the cultural wealth in this particular community. So again, this CECL framework is creating the shift from the traditional model into one where that knowledge and that wealth is acknowledged and appreciated. So the framework involves these three areas, and different aspects of these areas are woven into CECL. And then the foundation is based on a few guiding principles. And so the first, community engagement, again, it's a term that's thrown around quite a bit. Critical service learning and civic learning. So these are the three things that make up this framework, and different aspects of each of these are woven into the CECL foundation. And then we have these guiding principles. So with community engagement, as I said, it really, a responsible community engagement should focus on measurable change, right? Not just student learning, moving away from the student-centered pedagogy to one of equity-based. Not just, I'm not saying that students should learn, of course they should learn, but one of the ways in which they are going to learn is through that measurable change, right? So with responsible community engagement, there should be a focus on measurable change. Again, with traditional service learning models, at the end of the semester or at the end of the hours being worked, the question should be, did you make a difference? And if the answer is, I don't know or no, then you need to continue to do it. Because the point is that you should create some sort of social change. There has to be a shift. And so in doing that, or in addition to that, we want to create partnerships that encourage institutions like ours to work with community members and community allies to understand their clearly defined needs. So the story I told of this organization not seeking out farmers is an example of this. Like go out into the community and ask, like, what is going on? How can we work together to solve this problem, instead of swooping in and saying, I'm going to solve this problem, I'm going to save the world for you. And as I said before, we ask students, we ask faculty, we ask the community themselves to recognize that community expertise. right? I mean, that is responsible community engagement. You're engaging in the community in a responsible manner. Again, oftentimes community engagement and service learning programs can be detrimental because you're sending somebody in to do work and not collaborating with the allies that exist there already, and nothing gets done, right? I mean, there's nothing to show for the work that's been done. There's no change that's happened. This approach, the Cecil approach, challenges the students and faculty to actually focus on some sort of measurable change. And listen, I get it, like this is a huge lift. And people I've talked to about this at other schools, you can just, whether or not they do it, you can feel the eye rolling, like it's very difficult to create actual measurable change. But if that isn't the goal, then what are we all doing here, right? I mean, I understand maybe it's for the grade, to give the students the grade, that's fine. But if we're going to develop a program like this, that should be the focus, right? Because what are we doing? If again, being a community college, a college within a community, we want to be able to work with that community to enact some change. Otherwise, it is just for the outcome or for the grade. Secondly, critical service learning. So this requires a shift in how those project-based education and those traditional service learning assignments are created. And that's important because, again, there needs to be collaboration between faculty and student. On the student side, we have to challenge them to investigate those and understand the root causes of the problem. Like that is part of critical service learning. You want to see these issues through that critical lens. Like, why does this organization exist in the first place? Why is there a need for an organization that addresses the unhoused population? Like, why do we have to have this in the first place? Understanding those root causes can help them to develop these courses of action, and that's where project proposals can come in. That's where campus clubs can work together in conjunction with a community organization, develop courses of action that challenge that structure, those structures that perpetuate the problem. This is not, as I'll talk about in a second, this is not something that just happens within a semester. With the Cecil approach, it is not semester to semester. There's longevity involved, there's sustainability involved. If one group of students, and with the transient student population, right, 2 years in and out, whatever it may be, this can be difficult. But if one group of students passes on the information to the next to continue a particular project, then we've achieved the goal. Again, with traditional service learning, it is like a semester to semester situation, 12 hours, reflection paper at the end, out. And then the next group of students does the same thing. But what measurable change has actually happened other than teaching students how to write a reflection paper? So critical service learning is really important because understanding why an issue exists, and we do this in many of our classes, why it's happening, not just that it's happening. It also emphasizes a focus on power redistribution. We talked about this before, shifting away from that deficit-based perspective to one that values that community and cultural wealth. And I think generally, students, particularly young students, Gen Z, maybe some young millennials, and certainly the older alpha generation coming up, they understand this horizontal power structure better than most, right? Because with the development of social media, they have been doing this. So that power redistribution makes sense to them. After talking to other directors of similar traditional service learning programs, even pre-pandemic, the number of students getting involved had declined. And they were trying to figure out why this was the case. But if you looked at the model, it's very much a top-down approach to it, right? Very much included a lot of sort of elite institutions. And I don't know that young people were into that, right? I mean, it's like, let me be a part of developing this thing. let me be a part of coming up with these solutions rather than, again, just sending them off to an organization to do work. Power redistribution is what in my opinion, I think young people respond to. In political science, you're constantly reading about from these elite organizations, elite institutions telling us that young people are not involved in politics, which is not true. They are, they're just not involved in a traditional way that typically, you know, academic researchers tend not to study, right? In these non-traditional forms of participation. Although they've been doing it more and more over the last few years, they're looking at traditional measurements of participation and saying young people aren't doing anything. But if you jump on social media or whatever it may be, you see young people involving themselves in politics because of that horizontal power structure. So by creating that level of respect between the students and the community and the institution, that's what focuses and creates those authentic relationships. Again, if a community organization or community general has been burned by a higher education institution in the past, why would they trust him? You know, it's like pulling out of the organization without any change happening. And it's this, what do they call it? The revolving door of students coming in and out, but there's no measurable change. This approach with that mutual respect across the board with all the stakeholders, that's what creates that authentic relationship. Those authentic relationships is what creates the sustainability of the program. Third one, civic learning. The process of infusing civic knowledge, skills, and values in the curriculum that facilitates what's known as civic imagination. Tim Wise talked, I don't know if he called it civic imagination, but he has talked similar things in the past. Giving the students the knowledge, giving them the tools, helping them to understand the value of the community facilitates a civic imagination. That civic imagination is this idea that people see themselves as an agent of change. And they're less likely to be involved if they don't think they'll be able to create that change, right? We know this to be true. I certainly saw this with my students that developed this app. They were shocked that they were able to do something about this problem. And then when it happened, it was like, well, what are we going to do next? We've got this group, we've got these students, like, let's tackle something else. When people see that, and I say people because it's young, older, returning students, it doesn't matter. If they see that change can happen, they're more likely to continue to want to do something. At the beginning of my class, I typically ask, well, why do you think people have been telling you that young people don't involve themselves with politics? Why are you not interested? Knowing full well they are interested, they just do it in a different way. Why do you think they're not? And a lot of them say, well, I can't make a difference. I won't make a difference. Well, this gives them the tools. This gives them the curiosity, the imagination to see themselves as actually making a change. And then when it happens, when that change is actually happening, then they're encouraged to do it again, or they're encouraged to do it more. It can lead to all these other things that don't necessarily have to do with community engagement or civic learning, whatever it may be. Just having the imagination to see yourself, a higher level of self-efficacy and empowerment. So those are the three things. Different aspects of these three things are woven into this framework, this CECL framework. And these three things are sitting on top of these five principles, five guiding principles: social justice, power dynamics, community reflexivity, and sustainability. A few of these were already talked about, so I won't go over too much more detail. But these are the principles on which that framework sits. So with the social justice principle, of course, we want to examine the roots of social injustice. And this is part of the work that the student does, but it's also part of the work that the faculty should do. And of course, part of the work that the community organization does, and they do it all in concert and collaboration. Challenging injustice with the goal of promoting equity is part of that principle. Like, again, the goal should be making actual change, right? Creating actual change and addressing some of those issues and coming up with actionable solutions. Meaningful social change that's both incremental and holistic, right? But doing so collaboratively. Challenge and address that social injustice. How can we come up with solutions together? Power dynamics. We talked about this a lot during this, well, my discussion to you, my presentation to you. It's a redistributive model. There's a lot of sharing of authority. The expertise of all stakeholders are involved. And again, this is what I was referring to previously with students being, aware of this. They're more attracted to this type of power dynamic rather than the top-down approach. It's a more horizontal power structure. We're sharing authority. We're working together. We're asking about the expertise of everybody involved, not just the faculty members at the institution, not just the students, but them all working in concert. And then of course, we need to confront our assumptions and the stereotypes around competency and knowledge in the community. It's flowing in one direction because we're faculty members at a college, because we have PhD or MA behind our name. That single flow of it, like we're the ones who know, we're going into the community and we're going to do this work for you. And the people in the community say, well, we've been doing this work for decades. What are you doing here, right? We need to sort of address those stereotypes, address those assumptions we have about the community. Again, get rid of that deficit-based perspective, one that's asset-based, and a multi-directional flow of perspective, right? Not just that single direction from the top down, the smart people and everybody else. Acknowledging the fact there are people in the community who know a ton more about that community than you do. And that gives that equitable weight. And again, I think this model or framework of power dynamic is what younger people specifically, but people generally appreciate because they're involved in it. Community engagement. Again, one of the principles should focus on asset-based approach. We've talked about this, co-creation, leveraging of that multi-directional flow of knowledge. Again, this type of community building is necessary to sustain the program, which we'll talk about in a second. That creates that respect and that trust, creates those authentic relationships with these organizations. So this is a really important principle because again, community college, it's in the name. Again, we talk about the community, the college serving the community, but it needs to be this sort of this back and forth approach. That's what creates authentic relationship. A program like this, many service learning programs sort of come and go because of a lack of sustainability. Acknowledging and respecting the community and the allies within the community is necessary to sustaining that. And this is what it can look like. This is the clover leaf. It involves community members, community organizations, college students, faculty and community engagement professionals, and then the projects in the middle, right? And they're overlapping. There's weight given to all, equitable weight given to all of the partners, all the stakeholders involved. And I guess this is the fourth one, reflexivity. As I mentioned, with traditional service learning, there's a passive reflection that happens. You're not looking at it through a critical lens. There's not a ton of digging. There aren't big questions that are being asked. Again, there are many schools that do it very, very well and other schools that don't do it so well. CECL advocates for this active reflexivity. So active reflexivity in the context of community engagement requires that everyone involved in these projects continuously and critically examine their position within the experience. Right? Constantly throughout the whole thing, because it changes, it shifts. And how has your position changed throughout? How has it shaped the experience? And why has it shaped the experience? What did you bring to this particular project that took it in this way or the other? How has that role shifted over time? Okay. Here's some examples. You don't have to read all of these, but what do you think about your organization's ability to make a significant difference in the world? What did you value the most? What was your criticism about the work that's been done? What are your misconceptions about the population that you may have had before? What is it now? which core concepts and activities in which you are engaged, what gave you a sense of empowerment, see yourself as an agent of change. I mean, again, it's not a difficult concept, this stuff. It's like, well, yeah, this makes sense that you would dig deep. But again, most service learning programs don't involve questions like this, where you're having to examine yourself, as they do in the, the RAMREL program as well. I don't remember what it was called when I went through. It wasn't RAMREL, but I mean, we were asking some very big questions of ourselves, and similar questions being asked in these active reflections that should happen throughout a program like this. Lastly, sustainability. The long-term maintenance of these initiatives to ensure that everybody involved, all the stakeholders and all the stakeholder groups, are being attended to over time, right? Again, sustainability is key here. We want to be able to pass the information on semester after semester after semester. The only way in which to do that is to develop those authentic relationships with the community, with their community organizations, community partners, the members of the community. Again, irresponsible community engagement can create distrust. And there's oftentimes a lack of respect because of this idea that we just know more because of the education that we have, et cetera. So sustainability is important, but the way we sustain that is building these authentic relationships. Okay, so this program doesn't exist yet, but from research that's been done in similar areas, students will get out of this, but not just students, faculty members as well, and community organizations, increased self-awareness, self-efficacy. I can make a difference, self-empowerment, not just empowering others, but empowering yourself to make a difference, increased awareness of civic agency, a better understanding of the community. And of course, which is very important to our college, is workforce preparation. That's, teaching students how to operate in the community, is giving them the tools to do so, is really important. Listen, I understand that this is a big lift. I understand. Well, let me just get to the challenge. Well, okay, overview of what we're trying to do, and then we'll get to some challenges. We're pairing students with organizations, but again, we're doing the CECL work. We're incorporating the CECL initiatives. It's not just that typical traditional service learning. Encourage students to develop their own projects, get campus clubs involved, provide resources for faculty members, and then ultimately, down the line, create a leadership and social change course, certificate program maybe. Student recruitment, in terms of our challenges, and this will be sort of the end of it. In terms of our challenges, student recruitment is always a problem. Getting interested students to do it is a problem. Faculty buy-in is a problem. It's a heavy lift. There's work involved. And but again, if the goal is to actually create change within the community, it seems like it's worth it. Sustainability is always a problem. One of my colleagues at College of the Canyon, the former colleague at College of the Canyon, Dr. Patty Robinson, she's been doing it for a very long time at that college. And she's gone through different faculty members, different administration, but they've been able to sustain a program. It's evolved, it's changed over time, but the program has been sustained over time. And I think that's obviously the most important, because again, this is for longevity here. Resources, having resources to do it is always a problem. Working with a budget, whatever it may be. And then creating a course like this, removing courses, adding courses, the college doesn't, I don't, again, this is not it's above my pay grade, I think, but from folks that I've spoken to about this they've said, they're editing courses rather than adding. And I know there's some folks in this, attendees here could speak to that as well. So anyhow, if you're interested in helping, again, this is like both a presentation, a pitch, and a recruitment effort. Please email me. This is a collaborative effort. I was asked if I was interested in doing something like this, and I will say, because of the previous work I'd done, when I was asked about service learning, I sort of cringed, because I have come to understand the the implications of the traditional service learning model and how students haven't been super interested in it and understanding why that's the case. So we're trying to make it different, have from, again, shifting from hours to impact. So does anybody have any questions? I again, full disclosure, I don't know if I can answer these questions. This is a brand new endeavor. So, but ask away. Again, I can't, oh wait, now I can see the chat, of course, yes. Eiffel, yes, that's what it was. Eiffel. Okay, any questions? Comments, concerns? Probably lots of concerns.
So on a practical level, in individual content related classes, or let's say I'm an English instructor at Fresno City College, so it's
Yeah.
not even a content class, it's a gateway class kind of.
Sure.
So yeah, the practical implementation of all of this within our college.
Yep.
I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about, as you spoke, my classes in the last 4 years, the theme has been social justice, and everything in my class revolves around that.
Yeah.
And so they write about it and they research different types of social justice happening in this world in order to be able to have a voice and just awareness.
Yep.
But I think, wow, this would be so cool to take this to the next level with service learning.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a good way to put it, because you're doing the work, right? You're doing the CSIL initiatives by teaching by that content. Next level is the right word. Oh, did I lose you?
That was me. That was me, Nick.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I think that's a really great way to put it, is that next level stuff is taking it to the next level. So, and again, I know it's going to be difficult, but I am optimistic about this in part because of the faculty that I work with specifically, but faculty that I've spoken to aren't necessarily in my discipline. We're like, yeah, this is great. We just got to make it happen. So it's a very collaborative campus. I've worked on other campuses that weren't so collaborative. So there wasn't a lot of faculty buy-in. So I'm optimistic in that regard. Anything else?
Any more questions for Nick? Just unmute yourself, ask.
Yeah, totally.
We have 15 minutes.
Got some time.
Got some time.
And again, as I said, if you, I guess I can put my email in the chat as well. Just feel free to reach out. And if you have, sorry, I can barely do one thing at a time, let alone type and talk. So if you have ideas about how this can be implemented, or other folks who might be interested in helping out, just shoot me an email, and I'll be on campus all of next week. So come by. Thank you guys. After lunch, it's a tough gig, so I appreciate. Oh, Kelly, that's a really great question. I've been researching this. What kind of community involvement? So with mathematics, like gathering statistical information about whatever issue it may be, unhoused population, I don't know, the myriad of issues facing a community, mathematics gets involved on that sort of level, is like gathering that information, surveys, statistical information that they can then use to create projects, super beneficial. And I think that's, data, again, not my world, so I don't even know the terminology, but yes. And then what would be really great is to have different groups of students from different disciplines coming together to work on a project instead of this just being housed in a particular area, which is oftentimes what happens, right? It's like, oh, this is just social sciences, or this is just poli-sci. That's bull, right? I mean, bringing students from all over coming together, I think would be really cool, and they can work together on projects. So anyhow, that's a good question. I've been researching, because I was thinking the same thing. Is like, how do you get, and there's a ton of stuff out there about a lot of research about mathematics and critical service learning. So I'm glad you asked that. I meant to mention that actually. So thank you.
All right, this is Kelly again. I decided to unmute myself.
Thanks, Kelly.
So like, I don't have any specific ideas yet, but what should be like my next step? Like, if I want to continue thinking about this, what should I do next?
I don't know. If you have that answer, you let me know, because no, I mean, I think again, once the sort of framework is developed, the practical framework, not just this sort of ideological or philosophical, is start in your classes, like create a micro program within your course, just to get students sort of onboarded at a very small scale. And that is my plan for spring, is to sort of onboard it then at a very small scale within my classes. And I don't know what that would look like for mathematics, but asking students to identify issues where statistics and data can be involved in coming up with a solution. Again, from discipline to discipline, it's sort of hard to say, but the bottom line is that project-based approach. And in STEM classes, I know generally in STEM, that's a significant part of that curriculum are those projects, whether, they're making 3D models of something, that is a project that they're doing. This just has to do with social justice, right? I mean, it's still the same basic formula. It's just a different problem they're trying to come up with.
Yeah. Okay.
And counseling offers a class called Civic Responsibility Engagement. Ooh, I'd be interested to see what that looks like. And again, that's civic responsibility and engagement. I'd be interested to see what is being taught.
Hi, this is Stephanie from
Hey,
counseling.
Stephanie.
Yeah, I just typed that in there. I knew that we had a class, along these lines, and I just looked up it in the catalog.
Okay.
I know that it's primarily used for our special programs. I think like Puente might use this class, but anyway, if you're interested in connecting with our department curriculum
Absolutely.
chair, his name is Jack Yang, and he can probably give you more info on what the class actually does. But
Yeah.
I'm thinking, if you're needing a class that's already on the books, this might be.
Yeah, right. And
Right.
that was, the advice I've been given is don't reinvent the wheel. Selfishly, I'd like to reinvent the wheel because I don't know what other people are teaching. I would love to create a community organizing class where you're teaching students how to organize themselves around a particular campaign. And so anyway, I'd like to see if that particular class includes curriculum like that. Like, how do we teach our students who are interested in protesting? How do we teach them to do it responsibly? And so that kind of thing. Anyhow, Thank you, Stephanie. Darcy, I really like that about your ASL classes. That is super important. The understanding of the community, I think, is the key. Understanding the community, because there's all those, you bring with you your biases and stereotypes, and so that's great. We need a committee. Do we? I don't know. Someone who's on Senate, I'm not sure. Yeah, I think we do need a committee. I agree. This needs to be a collaborative effort for sure. Thank you all. I appreciate you showing up. I'm glad I didn't have to talk about particle physics though. Thank you guys.